Welcome to Confessions of a Parent Coach. I'm Coach, mother of four, and potty talker, Ann Kaplan. This is the podcast where I confess something from my own parenting and coaching life, teach a lesson around it, and answer your questions. Even we parenting experts are far from perfect, and the real magic happens when we get down with all that imperfection. We get into the gritty side of parenting here, so earbud up and dive in.
Hey, everybody. Welcome into another episode of the podcast. So happy to be here with you again, my dear listener, and excited about our topic for today, which is about warnings and reminders. So, for anyone out there who is finding themselves feeling like a broken record, I got to tell you guys, I use that expression all the time, feeling like a broken record. And like a year ago, I was like, do people even know what I'm talking about? I feel like I'm getting really old, and people don't know what a broken record sounds like. So being a broken record means you're saying the same thing over and over again, like a record that's broken, and so it's skipping and repeating over and over again. So if you feel like a broken record, this podcast episode is going to be for you. And also, I highly recommend getting my freebie, which is a super easy Bitly link, and it's a free workbook that helps you stop yourself from constantly repeating yourself and get out of this like broken record syndrome. And the workbook is called Getting Kids to Listen the First Time. It is huge. And so you should totally get that if you're struggling. Listen to this episode first, but then go and get that freebie because it's going to take a lot of the stuff that we talked about today and add a bunch of new components to it and help you like really apply some actionable stuff. And that link, in case you're looking for it, is bit.ly/kids who listen. But I digress. This is not a podcast selling you my freebie, especially since I make no money if you get it. It's not going to make me a whole lot of money to sell that thing. And also today's episode is slightly kind of overlap with what's in that workbook, but a little bit different because what we're talking about today is the feeling of warning, giving your kids warnings all the time. And I'm going to give you a little story because this is Confessions of a Parent Coach, right? So I'm going to give you a little story about me breaking the rule of not reminding and not giving my kids warnings. That just literally happened like a month ago. So in case you guys think that like once you learn this stuff, you just transform into like the most amazing Mary Poppins of parents, that ain't happening. I teach this stuff all day long. I have no problem identifying when people are kind of getting off track and what's getting in the way for them and all of that stuff. And you know what? I can do that for myself too. But still, I make mistakes. I constantly slip back into classic behaviors that don't serve me, don't serve my kids. And reminders and warnings are a really great example of that. So we are so lucky in my family that when my grandmother passed away about, gosh, probably like 14 years ago, she had this amazing house up in northern Michigan. It's on a lake. It is just like seriously like summer camp like in the movies, except you just live there. It's so awesome. And when she passed away, that house became our family's house. And so in the summertime we come up here and we're just like living lake life, and it is awesome. And this is where I host my retreat every year for moms. So if you haven't signed up for that this year but you think this sounds pretty fabulous, it is. So keep that in the back of your mind for the next time I'm hosting. It will be next fall. But anyway, that's where we are right now. We're spending our summer up here. It's awesome. Our kids are just like boating, swimming, fishing, hiking, doing all the shenanigans. And also, we try to still have responsibilities and chores and have a routine and stuff like that. And especially for our youngest, he is really going through a lot of stuff right now just because of his age, needing to have routine and a checklist and all that good stuff. And one of his things on his checklist is emptying the dishwasher, which he's totally good at, but he definitely likes to resist doing it. So in our family, the rule is, and now you'll see how I have to confess that I did not follow this rule, but the rule is like when it's time for you to do your job, we don't necessarily expect that you just like realize it's time to do your job. Sometimes that happens. Like my eldest son, his job is taking out the trash. And if he sees the trash is full, he'll just take it out. We don't need to tell him. But sometimes he won't notice that the trash is full. And the same thing with the dishwasher. Like Sky is not going to just like magically be aware that the dishwasher is clean. So we don't have any rules like, well, you have to go and check the dishwasher or whatever. No, we'll tell you. And we tell you once. That's what the rule is, not what I actually did. We'll tell you, hey, Sky, the dishwasher's ready for you. And here's a tip. Don't just say, please do this thing, but give a deadline. That you'll find that in the workbook, by the way. Give a deadline. So, hey, the dishwasher's empty. Could you please clean it up before screen time or before dinner or whatever, or in the next 10 minutes, whatever. Give a deadline. We don't necessarily need to be raising kids that have to like immediately hop to the second that we say something, right? So that's what I'm supposed to do with Sky. And then if he doesn't do it, then that's too bad for him. He's made a little bit of a bad decision, and he'll have to experience what happens when he makes that decision. But I was not doing that. In the beginning of the summer, we got out here and I would tell him the dishwasher was clean. I would not give him a deadline. And if he didn't clean it up, I would just remind him over and over and over again, like 5, 10 times. And he would argue with me about, well, I don't want to do it, or I'll do it later, or I did it already today. Cause when we're up at the lake house, like there's a lot of people here. We're sharing space with like my mom, my sister. The dishwasher needs to get emptied frequently. And he would complain about it, and we would get this back and forth. And I would be constantly warning him, if you don't clean up this dishwasher, you're not going to get to have screen time, because that's one of the rules in our house is screen time is for kids who've done their chores, cleaned their rooms, taking care of their responsibilities. And instead of just saying it once and letting him experience the consequence of not having screen time, I said it 100 times and started warning him, Sky, you're about to lose screen time. Oh, Sky, it looks like you're not doing your job. I guess you're not going to maybe get screen time. I hope you make a good decision. Blah, blah, blah. Really breaking every rule in the parenting rule book, breaking my own rules for myself. And finally, it took me way longer than I'd like to admit to realize, like, what am I doing? This is so stupid. We're like fighting with this kid about emptying the dishwasher. And I finally sat down and realized, like, okay, enough with this. And I even told Sky, like, I realized that I'm like nagging you about the dishwasher, aren't I? Yeah, Mom, you are. Yeah, I'm sorry I've been doing that. I hate how it feels to nag you and get frustrated with you. And I know that I don't like it when people nag me. So I'm going to make a promise to you. I'm going to do my best to not do that anymore. And instead, I'm just going to tell you once. And if you do it, great. And if you don't do it, that's fine. I'll do it too. And I'll know that you just chose not to do your job. And I already know that when you don't do your job, you don't get to have screen time. And that's totally cool. That's your choice. And after that conversation, I stuck to my guns. I only said it once. Well, guess what? He never lost screen time because he always did it the first time that I said it. Why didn't I do that from the freaking beginning? I don't know. Okay. This is what today's episode is about, because I have to tell you, every single parent that I work with, when we start learning, like when you work with me, you're going to get this experience of learning all these new ways of handling situations with your kids, and new ways of being, new energies that you can bring to the table, and just a new way of existing in a relationship with your kid. And it's new. It's very new. It's new to mom and dad. And because of that, I think parents feel that they're blindsiding their kids, and they feel like they need to sit down and have this conversation with their kids, where it's just like, hey, from now on, I'm not going to yell anymore. I'm not going to fight with you anymore. I'm not going to give you punishments anymore. From now on, I'm just going to say things once. I'm going to stay super calm, and I'm going to, give you a consequence if you decide, not to comply with this boundary that I've set. And that's it. And I get the question all the time, like, should I like give the kids a heads up that this is happening? So I'm going to really answer that question for you today. And then I'm going to kind of go deeper with that, because what happens is not just, hey, I want to have this one-time conversation where I like give everyone in the family a heads up that there's like a new order in place now. What happens is that feeling, that urge, that need to warn your kid sometimes sticks around. And then we slip back into warning our kids that they're going to get a consequence, reminding them so they don't get a consequence. We want them to do the thing we want them to do so that we don't have to consequence them. And that leads us to doing all this warning stuff. And in the group just a few weeks ago, one of the moms in there, she put it so simply. She's like, when I tell my kid, and this is a direct quote, when I tell my kid, you need to stop doing that. And if you don't, here's what's going to happen, without the warning, without prefacing it with that heads up, I question myself after the fact. Was I being mean? Was it unfair what I did? If I give my kid a consequence without giving them a warning first, is that mean? Is that fair? Now I'm questioning myself, is what this mom is saying. So here's what I say about warnings. Let us be very, very clear. Your kiddo already knows the stuff that you're going to start disciplining your child differently around when you start working with me is stuff that your kid has already been informed of is against the rules or it's not okay. They already know why. I guarantee, because I guarantee that you have said to them probably 3 million times, we don't hit, we don't bite, we don't, run away, which is what this mom was dealing with. Her kid's a runner. Love those runners, man. Those runners are going to rule the world when they're when they're adults. If we could just keep them safe until they get there. We don't run, we don't hit, whatever it is. I promise your kid has already been told that that's a rule. And I promise that you've probably already even explained to them why it's a rule. You can't run. It's very unsafe. Anything could happen to you. What if a car came? What if a kidnapper came, right? Or we don't bite our siblings. That hurts them. That's not nice. Look at the boo-boo that you gave to your brother, right? Your kid has already heard the entire TED Talk on every single rule that you have in place in your home. I promise you that. So this is what I say to all my clients. The warning that you give your child is for you. It is not for your kid. Now, let me be clear. That's fine. It's totally fine to do things that are for ourselves and not for our kids. If what you need to do so that you can feel grounded and justified and really follow through on your new plan is to first have this kind of conversation where you just lay it all out for your kid. Like, this is the new way it is. Now, I know that now we can move forward. If that's what you need, give yourself what you need. That's totally fine. And sometimes the things that we do for ourselves, we need to ask ourselves, are they to the detriment of our child? And sometimes with warnings and reminders, the answer to that is yes. So if you truly are giving your kid this warning, this heads up, that's like a one-time thing, like, just so you know, this is how I'm doing things from now on. Or let's say you're making a new rule that you didn't have a rule like this before. Obviously, you got to let your kid know there's a new rule. That is a time when that warning, that heads up is not to the detriment of the child. But here are some times or considerations to take into account to decide sometimes maybe yes, I'm warning because I'm trying to give myself this feeling of justification. But in order to do that, I'm actually doing something that's not really serving my kid. So things that are to the detriment of the child about warnings are, let's talk about what happens when we give warnings to our kids, especially when we're giving warnings about things that our kids already know perfectly well is not okay, or that they're breaking a rule or whatever. First of all, we give them this experience that rules are wishy-washy. Because let's use the hitting and biting example. We've already told our kid that hitting and biting is not okay. Now we're trying to live this new order where we don't get upset about it. We stay neutral, blah, blah, blah. But we do have a consequence. There's something that happens when you choose to hit and bite. If you first are saying, please stop hitting, there's no hitting, we don't hit people. Remember, if you hit me, let's say the consequence for hitting is that you take some time, you take some space from each other. Remember, if you keep hitting, we're going to have to take space from each other. Now this child has hit multiple times and had the experience that the outcome from hitting is not actually the same every time. First, mom just says it's not okay. Then she says that more sternly. Then she starts making these threats and telling me what's going to happen if I hit. But what I'm experiencing is not the thing that she says is going to happen when I hit. What I'm experiencing is just talking. Or let's be honest, after you've reminded or warned your child multiple times, you're getting frustrated. So you're probably not talking. By time 3, 4, 5, and 6, you're probably yelling or at least speaking with some emotional intensity and frustration and irritation, right? So now this kid is having the experience like sometimes I hit, people talk to me about it. Sometimes I hit, people ignore it. Sometimes I hit, people yell at me. Sometimes I hit and I have to take space from my mom or the person that I hit or whatever. That's very confusing. What we really want, especially with little kids, and obviously when we're talking about hitting and biting, we're talking about smaller children. I hope you don't have like a 14-year-old who's biting people. But if you do, this would apply to that kid too. What we're trying to do with our discipline is help our kids connect the dots. This is what happened. I made this choice, and this is the outcome that I created. When we are giving lots and lots of warnings about things that our kids already have been warned about, they're not getting a clear connection between those two things because they're doing this behavior, but it creates multiple different outcomes instead of always creating the same outcome. We take space from each other. And so that is to the detriment of the child. All those warnings and reminders isn't helping your kiddo. It's not serving them. It might assuage your feelings, but it's not actually in service of your child. Let's talk about another example where warnings might be to the detriment of your child. So just like I said before, when you're giving repeated warnings and you're reminding over and over again, well, what happens? You get increasingly upset after every single time. And who can blame you? It is very frustrating to say something and not have the outcome that we want. It is very frustrating to feel like somebody is not listening, that you're invisible, you're being ignored. It's very frustrating. Okay. So the more we repeat ourselves, the more warnings we give, the more frustrated we become. But pretty soon we're not neutral anymore. And then when we deliver the consequence, well, guess what, guys? It's not a consequence anymore because a consequence is only a consequence when it's delivered with empathy and neutrality. If you're delivering your consequences with anger, frustration, irritation, you're not consequencing, you're punishing. And we know that punishments, punitive parenting is not where we're trying to be. So that repeated warning thing, it's to the detriment of your child because it's frustrating you. Okay. The other thing I want to talk about with warnings is what they call in Love and Logic. You might have heard, if you've listened to any of their recordings and stuff like that, you might have heard them talk about saliency. Saliency just means like how impactful is this experience for our kids? So how many times have you might have done this when you were a kid, or how many times have you heard your kids do this thing, which is, if you don't, stop biting me or hitting me, you're going to have to go to your room and take some space for me. I don't care. I love my room, mom. My room's the best. If you send me to my room, I won't even care. Or, I mean, the example I gave in the group call the other day was about as us as adults, where it's like, imagine you knew you decided to speed. You knew that you were going to possibly get a ticket, but in your mind, you're already like mentally prepared for the fact that you might get pulled over and get a ticket. And so in your mind, you're like, it's fine. It's worth it. It's probably not going to happen, but if it does, whatever, I can afford the ticket. Like you've spent that time kind of like mentally preparing yourself for this possible consequence that you're going to get so that by the time you get the consequence, like you're like, it's fine. I don't even care. It's whatever. That is totally what kids can do too. And now this consequence that might have actually been extremely salient, meaning impactful and leaving a lasting impression on your child, they have like built themselves up and steeled themselves for it to the point where when they get the consequence, they've already done all of this like ego based mental gymnastics to make it so that your consequence really doesn't have a huge impact on them. So I'm not saying like we should all be sneak attacking our kids, but think about how salient the experience could be for your child of like, I hit my mom and she immediately just says, uh-oh, looks like we need to take some space from each other because, I don't want to be around someone who's hitting me. And then immediately I'm in my room or I'm in the other room for my mom or we're not sitting on the couch together, whatever your version of taking space is. Imagine how impactful that is versus the experience of like, I hit my mom. She's like, please don't do that. I don't like when you hit me. And then I do it again. And she's like, seriously. And if you don't stop, I'm going to have to put you down from me, or we're not going to be able to sit together, or I'm going to take space from you. And we say that over and over and over again. By the time we take space, how even impactful is that experience? Because I've already like been bracing myself for it for the last 15 minutes. Do you see what I'm getting at here with the saliency? So a lot of those warnings, when we warn our kids about stuff that they already know full well is against the rules, we really aren't in service of our child. And the last thing I'll say that I this is kind of my own personal philosophy, is to the detriment of the child in repeated warnings, is it insults our children's intelligence. We're basically treating them like people, like goldfish who can't remember anything, who can't learn anything. Like I just taught you yesterday, that we don't run away, for example, without being with our grown up. I have the respect for your intelligence enough to assume and behave in the world in an actual relationship with you, which means like I can behave in the world as if we had this interaction yesterday and you are in relationship with me. So you still have that inside your brain somewhere, versus just treating our kids like they literally are goldfish, like they can't remember anything after like 5 minutes or something. That's not true. So remember that the overarching approach that we're bringing to our parenting, when we use this relationship based approach to parenting, where we manage our emotions, we set and enforce boundaries in respectful ways with our children, like what ultimately is happening between us and our kids is really sound, strong, secure, healthy attachment. What's happening inside your child, beyond just having an amazing, healthy attachment to a parental figure, is so many lessons of empowerment, self reliance, autonomy, agency, confidence. Do you see how important it is for us to really not insult our kids' intelligence like this, to constantly be warning them? And the last thing I'm going to say around the whole warnings thing is be aware if you're using the word if. Because remember the example that this mom gave in the very beginning, where she said, you need to stop doing that. And if you don't, here's what's going to happen. First of all, when we say you need to, blah, 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 that's not true at all. This child does not need to do whatever it is that you want them to do. They get to decide if they're going to do what they want, what you want them to do. And think about what happens even just physically inside your body when someone says, you need to do this and that. You need to call your mother. You need to step away. You need to whatever. It's very confrontational because it's somebody else really trying to control you, right? So I really encourage you to pay attention to your words. Pay attention to whether you're saying to your child, you need this, or I need you to, blah, blah, blah. That's another one. You don't need anything from your child. You are a grown up, which means it's your job to meet your own needs. So that's the first piece. The second piece is you need to stop doing that. And if you don't, here's what's going to happen. The problem with a lot of warnings and reminders is, depending on how we phrase them, they're not just reminders. They're not just warnings. They are threats. They are threats. And now think about what we're doing when we are making threats. This is not how we want to be talking to our kids. If you don't do this, blah, 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 you can picture me wagging my finger at you while I say that. That's not the vibe, right? That is not the vibe of mutual respect, of relationship-based approach to parenting. I mean, I think you can get where I'm going with this. So pay attention to your words. And now let's talk about why. Why do we do this? Why did I keep warning and reminding Sky about the dishwasher instead of following my own rules, the things that I know so deeply inside of me are the way to do right by my son? It's not always this answer for everybody, but I will tell you that is very, very common when we start to explore this in coaching. What we discover often is, why am I reminding and warning my child? Because I am not comfortable consequencing them. And then we can get curious about, like, well, why are you not comfortable? Why is consequencing your child this outcome that you're trying to avoid? because that's what's really happening, right? Like if I warn you enough, you'll do what you have to do so that I don't have to consequence you. We're trying to avoid consequencing our kids. Well, what, my goodness, why would we want to do that? Consequencing our kids is like a best gift they can ever get. When we do it well, with love, with empathy, with respect, when we're not punishing them, getting a loving consequence from a grown up in a safe, emotionally healthy relationship is a huge gift to our kids. But we don't think about it that way. We think about how uncomfortable we feel when they're upset. They don't get to have their treat, or they miss out on screen time in the case with Sky, or I don't get to go run around in the playground by myself because I ran away from my mom. So now I have to like sit in the stroller or whatever it is, right? They are sad often when they have their consequences. And we are heartbroken when we see our kids suffer. We want them to like take their lumps without complaining about it. Like, how many times have I heard a parent when I ask them, like, what would your ideal outcome be? Well, I wish my kid could just take no for an answer. Your kid's upsetness is how they take no for an answer. They took that answer and it really upset them, and now they're being upset about it. Imagine how much easier it would be for you to only say things once and follow through with a consequence if you really thought about consequencing your kids as a gift that you give them. If you really understood that it's okay for your kid to be uncomfortable and upset sometimes. And with this type of parenting, not only is it okay, you could totally comfort them while they're upset, even if the reason they're upset is because of a boundary you enforced. That is the beauty of relationship based parenting. I can be simultaneously the one who said, "Oh, buddy, you chose not to empty the dishwasher, so I wound up doing it. And because you hadn't taken care of your responsibilities, you don't get to have screen time today." I can be the one who says that to my kid and the one who hugs him and holds him while he's super sad about that. And it doesn't at all lessen the impact of that consequence for him. Withholding love and affection is not the thing that teaches our kids. It's giving them the experience of the outcome of their choice. So give yourself permission to work on getting comfortable with our kids' discomfort. Now, easy to say, very hard to do. This is why I have a job. You know, you could listen to this podcast all day long, and I hope you do. And I hope you implement everything that you hear from it. But I promise you, you are going to start to see patterns in your behavior where it's like, oh, I know I'm supposed to do this and this. I just can't make myself. Or why is this so hard for me? That's where someone like me comes in. It's my job to help you work on and get to the bottom of why. Why is it so hard for you? Why does it make you so uncomfortable when your kids are sad? What would make it easier for you? What are the baby steps we need to take so that you could start kind of like exercising and growing that muscle so that when your kid has to suffer the slings and arrows of life, you are actually their helpmeet and not their savior. You are there to support them and comfort them versus rescuing them and saving them. And the more you can get comfortable with that discomfort, the better able you are to do this stuff. And pretty soon, you won't have no problem letting go of those warnings and that habit. Okay. So I hope that's helpful for you today. And as always, got to answer a listener question. And this question was submitted anonymously. But this mom says, and you can see now why I used the examples I did throughout the podcast today. I have a toddler that will hit me when told no or something they don't like happens. For example, no more TV time. He soft swats, and that increases in how hard he tries to hit, and his hits are persistent. I'm unsure how to respond. I've tried saying no hitting and going to a timeout, and I've tried just ignoring the behavior, but they keep doing it and increasing how hard they hit. I'm struggling with knowing how to respond and being consistent with my reactions. I try to not get frustrated and yell, but I don't always do so great at the not yelling part. Any advice or help, sorry. Any advice or help is gladly appreciated. So, hopefully, listener, even just listening to everything we've talked about so far has already given you some ideas and clarity. The first thing I'm going to say is consistency. So you've tried a couple of things. I encourage you to pick one thing and stick with it for at least like a month before you pivot. Okay. The second thing is time out traditionally. And if you've listened to previous podcasts, you've probably already heard me get on my soapbox about this a little bit. Timeout traditionally isn't super effective with kids, but taking space is. And this could work even if you are like, okay, all those mamas out there who are breastfeeding, you know what I'm talking about. There's a time somewhere between 4 and 6 months where kids start biting and they will bite you while you're nursing them. And holy Hannah, that hurts so bad. This technique works even with that young of a kiddo, which is as soon as you get hit, instead of putting your kiddo in timeout, I encourage you to take space. You could say, oh, I don't really like being around people who hit me, or I'm going to take some space and I need some space from you because I don't want to spend time with someone who's going to hit me. I'll happily come back to you as soon as I feel like you're going to, treat me kind or be kind to my body or whatever language you want to say, especially for your kids. So in the 6-month-old example, you're not going to say all of that stuff. You probably would just say, oh, we don't bite. And you literally just put your kiddo down on the floor or in the crib or wherever. You just take space from each other. That's it. Especially with physical violence. And I hesitate to even use the word violence because with a little 2-year-old, like they're just experimenting. They're not actually trying to hurt anybody. That's one way that their frustration and sadness with their situation shows up. I wouldn't go so far as to say that your kid's being violent. But with physical aggression, let's say, space is really important because it's not just, remember that our boundaries are not about making our kids do something or controlling them. They're about taking care of ourselves. Well, when somebody is physically aggressive with me, the best thing I can do to take care of myself is to get some distance between me and that. So you could say, we always want to acknowledge the emotion, validate the emotion. So you could say, like, I can see that you're really upset that you've lost TV. Hitting is not okay. So I'm going to take some space from you until I feel like we can be safe with each other's bodies. And you don't even have to put your kid anywhere. You can literally walk away. And when I say walk away, especially with a 2-year-old, I mean like to the other side of the room or into another room. You might even go into your bedroom and shut the door for a few minutes or whatever. The great thing about starting this stuff when kids are so young, they catch on quick. So you don't necessarily need this big, long, drawn out space from each other. It could literally be a few minutes. And then you might come back together and say, oh my gosh, I think we're ready to try it again. So hopefully that's helpful. If you are starting to think this stuff is awesome, I really want some help implementing this. If you have been listening to my podcast and thinking about what it would be like to work with me and you're curious about that, now is the time to set up a consultation. They are free and they are for anybody who is curious about working with me, ready to truly invest time and energy and money into making these changes and doing so with a lot of support. And if that's you, what are you waiting for? We should be talking to each other yesterday. So set up your consultation. The link is in the show notes. I cannot wait to meet you, and I will talk to you guys all again next week. Bye, everybody.
The episode is over, but there's more waiting for you. You can grab my free workbook, Getting Kids to Listen the First Time, that walks you through the fundamental principles I teach all of my clients and applies them to this very universal parenting challenge. So if you're sick of repeating yourself all day long or just want to learn more about my style, you'll definitely want to go to bit.ly/kidswholisten. And if you're ready to work with me, let's meet. Set up a free call at bit.ly/KaplanCall, and let's create an action plan that gets you exactly where you want to go. And of course, links to all this goodness are in the show notes. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.